and welcome to the Idea People podcast. I'm Stephanie Graves, the CEO of Leanders Group. Leanders Group is a full-service PR agency focusing on strategic communications, marketing, and outreach. I'm thrilled to have you join us for today's conversation. Now, let me hand it over to our fantastic host, Rick Garcia.
Welcome to the Idea People at Leanders Group. I'm your host, Rick Garcia. Our guest is Media Relations Mastermind, Braden Bradley of Hunter PR. Braden has developed and executed big brand marketing campaigns for the likes of Amazon, Meta, Samsung, PepsiCo. Braden, welcome to the Idea People.
Thank you for having me, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here.
You consider yourself part of the new age of media relations. So first, define for our listeners media relations, for those folks who don't know what we're talking about. And why don't you tell us what the new age aspect of that is?
Well, I feel like I must be an old veteran in this industry trying to define the new age of media relations. But to answer your questions about what standardly media relations is basically just conveying a brand story to the public to create more awareness and affinity of the brand. And the marketers in the industry would say that hopefully this would convert into some sales of whatever product or brand items that a consumer is trying to buy. But particularly within media relations, it's just about creating awareness for customers and the general public.
And in order, go ahead.
I was going to say, in the new age of media relations, of course, with social media taking off probably about, I don't know, I would want to say maybe a decade ago is when it got really, really big when it comes to like marketing campaigns and public relations tactics. So the new age of media relations is trying to meet the consumer where they are, whether it be on social media platforms or if they happen to subscribe to newsletters where they're actively reaching out, trying to get a brand's information sent to them, or if they're listening to podcasts. It's basically just thinking about the new forms of media that people are tuning into, listening to, getting their news from, and not just from a traditional print paper or even a digital.com website these days.
Okay, we're going to talk about, I guess, old age media because that's what I'm a part of as a former news journalist. But first, I want to talk about when it comes to branding. Every company has a story, and you want to try to tell that story, and then we'll get into the platforms by which you will try to put those stories on for everybody to see. So, start with the story. How does that work?
Well, you said all brands have a story, which I don't know if I agree with. I've run across a lot of brands that don't necessarily have a story or don't think that they need a story. But I think what you're trying to say is all brands should have a story because that's what makes them interesting, especially for a customer who may not even know your brand or someone who knows the brand but is a little hesitant on making a purchase or what have you. But the story is basically where the brand began, who started the brand. It's basically from a news journalist perspective, the who, what, where, when, and how. Essentially, is how you come up with a brand story. And part of media relations is figuring out what is best about that story and what you lead with, because we know our attention spans these days as human beings are like less than, I don't know what the stat is, but like less than 90 seconds, I want to say. So you want to start with the most important, when you're pitching, you want to start with the most important aspect of the story that you can to kind of bake that into the, whether it's an editor or a customer's mind, bake that in first, and then follow up with all the supporting elements of that story of the who, what, when, where, why, how.
So now let's talk about earned media and paid media. Can you describe both of those and what your approach is to media?
Yeah, so earned media is basically anything that you pitch out to news sources without a paid component. It's strictly, hey, like let's say you're watching the Today Show and there is an amazing story about a brand giving X amount of donations for, let's say, the terrible hurricanes that happened in the Southeast recently. So if it isn't sponsored, if it isn't paid, it's strictly just earned because it has a lot of news elements. The example I just gave, there's a timely element, there's a personal element, There is maybe a prominent element if you have a spokesperson to come on air to deliver their news. There's all these elements which I can get into later that I called the like earned checklist is what we call them here at Hunter. There's like 7 elements that you would want to check off in order to make the best earned story possible to land in a completely earned, non-paid capacity. So that's that. And then, of course, the paid capacity would be going to a publication or a daytime morning TV talk show and saying, I have X amount of funds. I would like to pay you for X amount of airtime in order to get my news across. So that way your news is guaranteed and it's much more controlled. You can control the messaging that you want to put out there. You can control the spokes that you want to deliver the messaging. You can control the scroll, like let's today's show, for example, the scroll at the bottom of the news segment. You can control what messaging is there. So you definitely have more power if you have dollars to back up your news.
Regarding earned media, when I was in the news business, people constantly pitch stories to me, the stories that they would hope that we would run with as a news story, and we really had to parse through that and weed out the ones that we thought were actual news stories versus what we thought would be advertisement, and then we would send those folks over to sales to talk about that. Earned media, is it still effective? A, B, is it more difficult or easier to get earned media today?
It is absolutely effective, and it is harder to land a really good earned story these days, and that's because the media newsrooms are shrinking. You know this, Rick, being a former news journalist. The newsrooms are shrinking, and it's very frightening for the industry. There's also publications that are folding. There's also new publications that are being established too. But sometimes there's can be a little bit challenging to stick. The Messenger, for example, was a new publication that launched, gosh, I don't know, maybe 8 months, a year ago, and it just folded a few months ago. So we were really excited to see this new platform being emerged in this like tumultuous times of the media industry. But however, it ultimately folded, which is really terrible. But to that point, there are a lot more freelancers. So as the newsrooms are shrinking and you think that earned media is getting more challenging, which it is, there's become a new route, which is kind of the new forms of media that we've been talking about, from freelancers who are essentially running their own business, who are hungry for news because that just helps them become more credible as a freelancer in the media industry. And they also have their own brands. They have their own social media platform, whether it's their personal platform or their new news platform. I was just speaking with a former colleague at CNN, and she recently left and she had just started her own .com publication. So she's now a new news source. So she, because of her like credibility in the industry, she's been a journalist, gosh, for maybe 2 decades at least. So because she has the credibility as being a really thoughtful and amazing news journalist, given that now she has her own platform, brands will reach out to her, giving her credibility, and will rely on her to report the news as being an independent sole freelancer and now owner of her own publication. That was really long-winded.
But effective, but effective. Braden Bradley of Hunter PR is our guest on the Idea People at Lee Andrews Group. Let's talk about executive interviews. Tell us what they are and why they are important.
So executive interviews are actually one of my favorite parts about the role I am in at Hunter as the media strategist over our tech practice. It's definitely effective. It's basically we use the executives as our brand spokespeople to either go on air or be interviewed by a top tier national media outlet about what the news is. So it's usually relevant. Like for Amazon, for example, we just had our Prime Day and we just had our Prime Big Deals Days earlier this month. So what we would do is reach out to the executive that oversees these events or oversees the Prime membership and put him in touch with our media and he'll even go on air at some points too to talk about what deals we've got going on and how the Prime membership and all of its benefits that comes with the Prime membership, how that's benefiting all the customers, especially as we're leading into holiday shopping season. So yes, definitely effective. And again, it just brings to life the news that we are trying to get out there via a real human being's mouth.
Makes sense. Tell us about the one-on-one off-the-record media meetings. How are they effective?
Yeah, so off the record, it's becoming a little bit more common these days. Before, like maybe I would say before the pandemic, before everyone was like virtual or hybrid or what have you, editors were a little bit hesitant to doing off the record because their time is valuable and why would they want to waste their time having an off the record conversation when they still have like 5 stories a day that they have to meet their quota on. Anywho, it's changed, and now because newsrooms are shrinking, editors have taking on more work that may not be in their traditional beat. So they are more inclined to have these off the record conversations with executives, not only to learn about the news before the announcement, which would give them more time to develop more robust coverage, which works both in both parties' favors. In their favor because they have more time to develop coverage, and then in our favor because given that the editors have more time, um, they'll have more time to develop a better piece of coverage rather than just taking what we've given them and the press release and stealing language verbatim for that. They have time to do a little bit more research and get third-party quotes that can make the coverage just more well-rounded and more interesting. And then two, it gives them the opportunity to get to know these executives on a more of like a human level. Yes, we're there to talk about what we've got going on off the record at the company and what the news is and what we're looking forward to, but also just being able to like humanize our executives because journalists, you know this, Rick, journalists are people too. I
Yeah,
think
thank you.
as media specialists, a lot of times we get a little bit, we put media on this, I don't know, this cloud or this like uphill, I don't know, something that we will never be able to reach as PR professionals, but I think that's totally not true because they need PR professionals as much as PR professionals need them. So having those off the record conversations just really like humanizes not only the executive, but also me and other people as media specialists. So like that's what creating a real relationship is about. So 2 weeks, 2 years down the road, you'll have that relationship baked in a real humanizing aspect. So you can always rely on them to at least take your phone call, take your pitch, hear what news you've got to say, take a meeting, what have you. Those are the times when real relationships can be developed for sure.
And just to clarify to our listeners, off the record would mean simply that you would call a Rick Garcia or a producer or somebody in the newsroom, have a meeting, phone conversation, could be a lunch, could be a coffee, and you would provide depth or more context to the press release, which is just a one-page document that would not be printed, that the conversation of which would not be printed or quoted on the air. That's thus the off the record.
Yep, that's exactly right. And it's also pretty much the same as an embargo. And for your listeners, an embargo is something that editors, producers will agree to ahead of the announcement date. So let's say we are announcing, like, let's say this podcast will be announced, I don't know, 5 days from now, it'll be published. But we give editors and producers a heads up, maybe 2 days before the podcast is published or a week before it's published. We give them a heads up. We give them all of the information that's going to go live when the announcement go live. But again, this gives them a week, 48 hours at least of time so they can like really develop the story. So when the announcement goes live at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, their coverage is set to go and all they have to do is press publish.
Braden Bradley of Hunter PR is our guest on the Idea People at Lee Andrews Group. All right, I'm not asking you for company secrets, but can you walk us through a generic campaign from start to finish in a Reader's Digest version?
Oh gosh. Okay. Reader's Digest version. I will try my best. Let's take our recent Amazon Prime Day campaign with Megan Thee Stallion. There was probably hundreds of PR people, marketing people that worked on this campaign. So I'll do my best as one little PR person who touched the campaign can do to explain how it kind of worked. So basically, it all started with Amazon's marketing company. We wanted to have a celebrity to be our mouthpiece, to be our spokesperson for the campaign when it comes to our earned media interviews, when it came to paid television commercial spots, radio spots, et cetera, et cetera. So after a bunch of vetting on the marketing and talent side of things, we landed on Megan Thee Stallion. So marketing and talent will come to PR people and say, hey, and the business will come to PR people and say, hey, our talent is Megan Thee Stallion. We have X amount of deals. We're also partnering with X amount of other celebrities and influencers that will have storefronts on Prime Day. And basically, what a storefront is, for those that don't know, is Megan Thee Stallion, for example, would have her storefront of Amazon Prime Day picks that Megan will be purchasing this year and recommending to other people to purchase as well. So all of these celebrities, all of these influencers and creators have their own individual storefronts too. So we have from the PR side of things, we have Megan Thee Stallion, we have a handful of celebrities, and we have a handful of influencers that we then pitch out to media for interviews. So for Megan, we run out to obviously a bunch of music press, a bunch of TV and film press, of course, our consumer, lifestyle, and celebrity press, trying to get all these interviews with her. And obviously, she's Megan Thee Stallion, so we had no trouble landing interviews with her, which was nice. Sometimes it's not that easy or simple. And then same thing with our celebrities and influencers as well, trying to get them interviews. So that's one piece of the pie. The other piece of the pie is, like I was saying earlier, getting executive interviews for Amazon spokespeople. So putting them on places like the Today Show, Good Morning America, Squawk Box, Bloomberg TV, etc. So that's another piece of the pie. And then another piece of the pie is pitching out what deals will be live for Prime Day. So that's not necessarily tied with an executive interview or a celebrity Megan Thee Stallion interview. That's just strictly giving the heads up to those outlets like Reader's Digest or People Magazine or Billboard Magazine or Marie Claire, Glamour, Cosmo, what have you. Just all of these deals that your readers can get on deal when Prime Day goes live. So that's all of like the proactive earned PR part of the campaign, but there's so much more. There's also like the paid and the social and blah blah blah, which I'll save your listeners.
Well, listen, I appreciate that, but here, so you mentioned Megan Thee Stallion, and I want to. Again, my generation a little different. Normally, we were accustomed to seeing a celebrity like a Megan Thee Stallion endorsing a product. But now we've entered this new era of media. You touched on it a couple of times, media influencers. People with little or no previous background in the media are kind of taking over. They're commanding huge salaries, endorsing products. The question is, are influencers here to stay, in your opinion, and how effective are the influencers versus the celebrities, the traditional celebrities, I'll call them?
That is a question that we have been asking ourselves probably every day for the past year and probably longer. My opinion today, which I'll be honest, it changes every day, but my opinion today is influencers, which we are now changing that term to be called creators, which I guess is a little bit more generic because influencers are now calling themselves creators. Whatever, it's fine. I To answer your question, I think it is here to stay. And to answer your second part of the question, I think at this point in time, celebrities are a little bit more effective when it comes to social and reaching um, followers that way. And the only reason I say that is because celebrities are seen, especially for like middle America, the middle class, which most of us are part of. They see the celebrities, whether it's on film or whether it's on cable TV, and in ads. So like that realm of media still exists, thus gives the bigger credibility or bigger following for a typical celebrity. Now, on the other hand, the creators who do have tons of followers, maybe not so much as the celebrities, given they're not on They're not in films or not in TV. I mean, they're getting there, but not quite as heavy yet. But those creators still have their niche followers, whether you're a beauty creator or a wellness creator or a food creator, they still have, if they're really successful, they still have their following. So what we typically like to do for a big campaign is get those celebrities that can handle our TV spots and big media national interviews, and then kind of in a 360 surround sound idea, pepper in influencers and creators around the celebrity that can hit those niches from food landscape, beauty landscape, or what have you, because they do have 1 million followers, and we don't want to count out those followers because those followers will likely turn into conversion into sales, which is what the whole goal is of a PR professional and a marketer too, is get those sales numbers up.
Yeah. How about podcasts? You're on one of a few million that are around the world right now, yet very few of them are monetized. How do podcasts play into the media landscape?
Yeah, so that's another thing. Podcasts are becoming like you said, millions and millions and millions out there. So that's another, in my opinion, untapped form of media that I think marketing and PR professionals could kind of lean into more. And that's just because it's another news source for listeners to get their news, updates from the day, what they're interested in, just kind of stay current with cultural conversations. And I think that's because of a couple of things. I think during commutes, now that we're getting back into the office, a lot of people are hybrid. So like driving, when you're driving to work, and if you're in the Midwest or the South or whatever, you, instead of listening to the typical radio, maybe it's your time to listen to a podcast. I know like a ton of people that do that. So that's where we could like insert our news in. People listen to podcasts on their morning and evening commutes to and from work. Um, Also, there are people are maybe sick of traditional news sources, like maybe people are sick of going to an MSNBC or Fox News or CNN because it's just so driven politically. So maybe they're turned to a podcast to get some of their news, which could be a little bit more, depending on which podcast you listen to, but it could be a little bit more easier and easier to digest and not so trivial or polarizing. So that's another reason that we want to reach podcasts too. There's just so many different forms of media, and being in PR, I don't think that we should leave any stone unturned when it comes to a news source, be it traditional or be it one of these new forms of media that we're talking about.
Braden Bradley of Hunter PR, our guest on the Idea People at Lee Andrews Group. Uh, let's see. Braden, tell us about substacks and newsletters. Newsletters have been around for a long time, back when they were on paper, but now we have substacks. Tell us about both of those and how they may benefit a client.
Yeah, so this is another new form of media that's kind of stemming from what we're calling news influencers. So the news influencers are people like Under the Desk News on TikTok and Instagram, or Mo News. Mo News is really amazing these days on TikTok and Instagram, and even like Now This or Puberty. Those are more like the news, social media news platforms that we're looking at these days, along with others. But Substacks in particular are those freelancers that I was mentioning earlier, like someone who used to work at Glamour and has either been laid off or choose to explore other opportunities in the freelance capacity of things. So they may have a Substack or a newsletter, which is basically a website that your followers can go to, and you see all sorts of updates from the perspective of this individual who used to work at Glamour and is now freelancing. So let's say her name is Anna, used to be at Glamour. Now she has this Substack. Hey, this is what's going on. And this website is, and a newsletter too. This is what's going on in the day of life of Anna. She's reading this, she's watching this, she's eating this, she's consuming this. And then also she's working on A, B, and C editorial opportunities for different publications. Maybe she's contributing to Travel and Leisure. Maybe she's contributing to Cosmo. Maybe she's contributing to bestproducts.com. So she has opportunities that are outlined in her Substack. So people, especially PR people who follow her, see what sort of opportunities she's got coming up and how we can insert our news or at least pitch her in that. So it's basically just, I don't know, I kind of say it in a day in the life of a writer, essentially. We're seeing them become more and more popular. And with newsletters, the reason we like newsletters is because we're seeing that, again, the traditional consumer isn't necessarily going to a goodhousekeeping.com or a gq.com to get recommendations. Rather, they would be more um, more privy to receiving newsletters being pushed at them, so they don't have to take the extra step to go find the recommendations on a .com, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Let's talk about you now. I believe you went to Texas State University. Are you from Texas originally? And if so, how does a Texas boy wind up in the Big Apple?
I am from Texas originally. I've been living in New York for almost 15 years now, which is crazy. So how did I end up here? Well, I grew up in a very small town of 2,000 people. In fact, when I was growing up, I didn't even know what PR was. I didn't even know what marketing was. Had no earthly idea what any of this was. And if you would ask me, my 10-year-old self, if I would be doing what I would be doing, what I'm doing today, you'd be lying. You would be telling stories on me. I would have no idea. Anyway, when I graduated college, I knew since I was little that I had always wanted to live in New York and work in media and do something big. I'm still waiting on the do something big part, but we'll get there. But basically, I just packed up everything into a U-Haul. Me and my roommates and my best friends packed it all into a U-Haul and drove 37 hours to New York City without stopping. And then I got my first real big boy job at Architectural Digest at Condé Nast in the sales and marketing department. And then all is history from there. My life opened up right after that job. I got the job on my birthday, actually. So it was a nice birthday gift.
Nice happy birthday. And now, is your journey one that you would recommend for some folks who may be listening now who said, boy, I'd love to get into public relations?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just pack up the U-Haul and head to New York?
For sure. But I would recommend probably staying at a hotel or two. Don't do it all at once. That was crazy. We were just so excited to get here. No, I would totally recommend it. There are, of course, things that I would have done differently or, maybe altered some things, but everything happens for a reason. And I truly am I feel like I'm in the right place at the right time currently, and it wouldn't have happened for everything that I've experienced in this career that led me to this point. I had no idea that any of this would happen, and I have no idea what's going to happen next, but I know it'll be the right thing because I just believe in that sort of universe, spiritual stuff. So yeah, I definitely would recommend it though. If you're ready for a wild ride, a wild, fun, crazy ride, I would definitely recommend it for sure.
To learn more about Hunter PR, you can go to hunterpr.com. If you want to learn more about Braden Bradley, how would we do that? I think you have a website, but I don't want to mention the address unless you're okay with that.
No, sure. I have my website, which is just bradenbradley.com. And then you can also follow me on LinkedIn, Braden Bradley, and then follow me on Instagram at Mr. Braden Bradley.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest on the Idea People at Lee Andrews Group. For more information about us, check out leeandrewsgroup.com. Braden Bradley, thank you so much for being a guest on our program today.
Thanks, Rick. Thank you for having me. This was super fun.
We got motion for the idea, people, the conversations open. Lee Andrews Group, the firm, yeah, we here now. Let's talk about great ideas, have a sit. We on a mission, you get the idea, people. Glad you pulled up, how you doing? Nice to meet you.